The next show will start in 1 minute.
Media, an illusion of choice. Do you know that only 6 corporations own 90% of the American media? The most powerful special interest group in Washington is the media. The media is the gateway of information to the American public, and any politician strives to reach the public through the media. Thus, the media have a great say in which politician is granted a voice. To provide a historical perspective, in 1983, 90% of the American media was controlled by 50 companies. Through a history of mergers and acquisitions, these companies have concentrated their control over what we see, hear, and read. In many cases, these companies control everything, from initial production to final distribution. Now only 6 companies own 90% of our media. Our main source of information and cultural output is coming from these 6 giant conglomerates: Comcast, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. Profit maximization is the ultimate goal of every corporation. And if that goal becomes entangled with reporting the truth in the news, what will ultimately win out? What happens when there is no one left to compete with? When one company owns everything in your town, does the people in your town have a voice in their media anymore? Would they hear or watch content that is relevant to their lives? Probably not. The more independent media outlets a community has, the more different viewpoints will be presented on air. And the question that arises, do we really have a choice in our media?
Streaming live from the Paul and Catherine Ranke Memorial Studio, this is TV Free Baltimore. Support for TV Free Baltimore comes from viewers like you. Become a TV Free Baltimore member by visiting patreon.com/tvfreebaltimore.
As a public service, TV Free Baltimore provides a digital soapbox for those the mainstream media ignores. The opinions expressed in this live stream are not necessarily those of the owners, management, or underwriters of TV Free Baltimore. Furthermore, TV Free Baltimore streams hyper-local content focusing on politics and entertainment in the Baltimore viewing area. Good afternoon and welcome to our latest stream here on TV Free Baltimore. And yes, it is not Saturday night. Unfortunately, we could not stream last night due to a very heavy recording schedule. We went out in the field yesterday and recorded quite a lot of things that we're going to bring here to you on TV Free Baltimore. The first one was a special edition of the Jimmy Mathis Show. as he gave a speech yesterday before the Republican women of Baltimore County. It was a sellout crowd, a very interesting speech, and I hope to get that to you ASAP. The next thing we did was yesterday at about 4 o'clock, we went down for the screening of Led Zeppelin Played here, and we recorded the Q&A session after the film screened. And I wish that the director, who was in here last week for an interview, would have told people this is the only way that you could see this film. I don't think he said that because it's not on CD and it's not out on the web anywhere. What I thought I would do today is bring up some of the things that come into the TV-free mailbox from a couple of sources and talk about what's going on in Annapolis in the next coming weeks. The first thing that I'm going to pull out of our mailbox comes from the Maryland Republican Party, and they say, unfortunately, that in the next 2 weeks there are a lot of bad bills that are having hearings, and there are 2 bills that would make Maryland a sanctuary state, and then there's a bill that would create, I guess you could call it, safe spaces where junkies could legally shoot up their heroin. And then there's a bill to force landlords to take on Section 8 renters. Now, the Section 8 information we've covered in great detail here on TV Free Baltimore, and I would stress that you go back and watch those videos where we talked about that, because what the Democrats want to do, both on a local level and a state level, is have the greatest migration of Section 8 renters from one political jurisdiction to another. They want to bring them out of Baltimore City and bring them into the surrounding counties, particularly Baltimore County, and we are certainly opposed to that. And the whole situation with having junkies to have a safe space to where they can legally shoot their heroin, I would suspect that's very heavily supported by delegates from Baltimore City, as they have tried for a number of years in a number of ways to legalize drugs. So let's go on to the next thing that came into TV Free Baltimore's mailbox, and this is from the Maryland Reporter, and this I find very fascinating, and I completely agree with what the governor did here. It says, yacht sinking stadium deal. It says, critics of Governor Hogan's quest to lure the Washington Redskins to Oxon Cove in PG County cheered, and I cheer it too, his abrupt decision this week to abandon his efforts. Now, they say that the state has failed to establish an economic justification to build a new stadium for the Redskins, and then the team's owner goes out, Daniel Snyder, goes out and buys a $100 million super yacht for himself, but yet he expects us, Maryland taxpayers, to pay for a new Redskins stadium. Kudos to the governor on just not pursuing that anymore, and hopefully he won't, and hopefully the Redskins will go elsewhere. I don't think there's going to be a great economic windfall for the state or for PG County if they build a brand new stadium for the Redskins. Now, something that I disagree with here is that, again, from the Maryland Reporter, touting toll lanes as part of its controversial plan to widen lanes on the Capitol Beltway and Interstate 270, Maryland says it intends to focus on creating more toll lanes. So that's just a new tax. Totally opposed to this. We don't need more toll lanes. In fact, they ought to take the tolls off of the express lane on 95. It's just a new way of taxing people. And let's see what else we have here. Health insurance. Again, from the MarylandReporter.com, there's a bill in Annapolis that would fine those without insurance. A coalition of state lawmakers and health organizations gathered in Annapolis Wednesday to rally support for a bill that would require Maryland residents to have health insurance or face a fine. Now, if you don't have health insurance, you don't have health insurance for one of two reasons. Either A, you've decided not to have health insurance, or B, you can't afford to have health insurance. Now, on the latter, it makes no sense to me to find someone that can't, in the first place, afford health insurance so that you can provide that person with health insurance. To me, that just is crazy. And if you decide not to have health insurance, let's say you're young, you're healthy, you don't need health insurance because you want to take your money and spend it for other things, then I think you should be free to choose how you spend your money, and that you should not face a fine for choosing not to have health insurance. Just more draconian legislation from the political left down in Annapolis. So that's our little political segment about what's going on in Annapolis, and what we have coming up next is this week's live stream, and I hope you enjoy it. There's a lot of we have a lot of stuff that has yet to be edited, a lot of stuff that we've filmed, interviews that we've done, and we're trying to get it out as quickly as possible. And I say that for those of you that have come in and done interviews and are asking, where's my interview? We're backed up, and I'm trying to get it out as quickly as possible. So enjoy this week's stream, and we will be back next week. Thanks.
Hi, this is Cindy Williams, and you're watching TV Free Baltimore.
This is Gunhild Carling, and you are watching TV Free Baltimore. You are not watching. You have to watch TV Free Baltimore.
So a little bit about myself. I've been in broadcasting for almost 25 years now. Talk show host over at WBAL for about 10. Currently work for NBC News in Washington behind the scenes. And my entire adult working life has always been communication and how do you get a message across? How do you frame that? And that's really the work that I want to do right now when it comes to local politics, is how we get the message of conservatism out there, especially when we're fortunate enough to have a Republican governor that's entering into his second term, and the leadership that we have with Delegate Kathy Szeliga and J.B. Jennings. And a lot of the pieces are in place right now for, I think, us to really take the conservative message to the next level. So in that spirit, I think one of the things that we need to get better at is messaging. And a lot of times what I think we collectively do, this is at the local level and really at the national level, our messages, it could always be worse, right? We're better than that guy, you know? And really this is where I think we came up short with Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, or McCain and Obama for that matter. It wasn't that we really ran on any core conservative principles. It was just, this is pumping the brakes. You don't want to continue down the road that we're currently on. And we hear that all the time, better than what it could be. That is not a winning message, especially when we have, it's not a winning campaign strategy. It's definitely not a winning message. It also, I believe, leads to complacency with our candidates once they assume office. And we're even seeing that nationally right now with President Trump a little bit capitulating to the left on something as basic as border security. We've seen it here locally on multiple levels. This strategy, I think, in a lot of ways leads to complacency and to our elected politicians that are constantly playing a prevent defense. And that's not moving the conversation forward. That's not moving conservatism forward. And it also divides us as a party. Especially when you think, what do we stand for as conservatives? We believe living in a civil society. We believe in individual liberty. We believe in property rights. We believe in religious liberty, physical sovereignty. We believe in law enforcement. Things that we believe and we hold close to our heart. When politicians run on these conservative ideals, they win. What does the left run on? Equality and fairness. From a rhetoric standpoint, we believe in those things. And actually, when you embrace property rights, individual liberty, religious liberty, all the things I just mentioned, that leads to equality and fairness. But from a rhetoric standpoint, a lot of times we abandon the equality and fairness because we're allowing the opposition to sort of set the pace of the race, if you will. And I think that we need to be stronger as a party on having ownership over equality and fairness. I've used to joke about this on the radio. I think sometimes we suffer from Stockholm Syndrome almost. And this ties back into allowing the opposition to sort of set the narrative. And it's what I was talking about earlier, where we're playing that prevent defense. I think we saw this a little bit, and I'm obviously very happy that Governor Hogan won a second term, but that capitulation to the left a little bit, that whether it was the gun bill at the time, we're looking at the minimum wage increase again. Look, there are things that you can work across the aisle on, and things that, sure, we can work with our friends, as Reagan would say, on the other side of the aisle, but that doesn't mean that we concede our most basic fundamental ideals as conservatives. And if we're going to, then what is the point of winning elections anyway? If we're going to become Democrat lights, then what's the point of all of this? And I think here in Maryland right now, especially after the 8 years that was the disastrous O'Malley administration, and you look at how well Governor Hogan resonated in the city, especially during his first election, he was able to capture 20% of the electorate, which is unheard of. I mean, nobody would have believed that was possible. There were a lot of center, slight left Democrats that support the governor. Obviously resonates very well with his base. This is the time where we need to throttle up, especially with somebody like a Governor Hogan and the leadership that we have with J.B. Jennings and Kathy Szeliga, to really explain and articulate what conservatism is and why it works in Maryland, and not just count the win being having a Republican governor for 2 terms, but who's going to replace him, and making that pitch right now. And I think that was part of the problem we saw during this past election, was there wasn't a unified message from the party on what we wanted to do. Sure, we wanted to get Hogan elected, and we did, but we didn't do a whole lot more. And there wasn't really a cohesive message on what a second term of the Hogan administration would look like. And that's really important, because the pitch for what's going to happen 4 years from now, that starts today. And I think that ties back into standing true for what our core beliefs are, not caving on more draconian gun legislation or the minimum wage, which is an assault on small business, or free college tuition for students. Any of these things, I think it's important that we right now start making the pitch on what conservatism is, and having that vision looking forward for 4 years from now, because that starts right now. And if you think about it, the biggest thing on the table was probably redistricting, which was talked about very little on the campaign trail. The governor needed 5 state Senate seats to be veto-proof. We got 1, which was in the 42nd, and that was Brochin's old seat. That was pretty much a guarantee. But on the larger scale of where the party goes moving forward, I don't believe that pitch was ever really made. And I think we need to do that right now, especially with the popularity of a Governor Hogan. We need to start making that pitch for 4 years down the road. That needs to be today. Again, the rhetoric, owning the conversation, owning the narrative of what's being thrown around the echo chamber out there. Words mean things, and this was something that I always took very serious in my time on the radio. And I think one of the words that has been more manipulated than anything out there right now is the word right. What is a right? And we hear this. This was a word I think that was very misused when it came to the healthcare debate. People have a right to healthcare. Well, they don't. The Bill of Rights is a charter of negative liberty, as we all know. It's a declaration from the people to their government, not on what the government must do, but what the government cannot do. The government cannot impede on a free press, cannot impede on freedom of speech, can't keep me in perpetuity without bringing charges. The federal government can't stomp on the states. You can't take my guns. Nowhere in there does the Bill of Rights lay out what the government must provide. And this is crucial, especially right now when we look at where the country is going when it comes to education and what the next generation of Americans believes that role of government is and what the responsibility of government is. And this is crucial, ladies, because these are the voters of tomorrow. And obviously, the liberal agenda is not sustainable. It never has been. Socialism never works. The argument has been it just hasn't been implemented correctly, but that's a fool's argument. It's never worked, and we don't need to do too much digging to see what open borders look like over in Europe, what socialized medicine looks like. It fails. It's one thing in life to make a mistake without having the blueprint in front of you of where that's going to go. It's another thing when you voluntarily go down that path and you champion an ideology that through the history of the world has never worked. And as a father of 4, and my oldest right now in the 6th grade, where they basically don't teach social studies, they don't teach branches of government, they definitely do not teach negative liberty, they don't teach the Declaration of Independence, they really don't teach the American Revolution. Well, that's going to be a very hard thing to combat when my 12-year-old shows up at the ballot box soon. And that's why I think, one of the key things that we need our politicians to be doing is not to be afraid of what conservatism is, but to be constantly promoting it, championing it, and not being fearful of it. And I've never understood this because politicians on the left, by the way, even those on the left, they run on conservative principles. And they win. They usually win in grandiose fashion. But then as soon as they become elected, they believe that actually delivering on these principles is a political liability. And for political reasons, they start to tack away from these ideals. And it has never made sense to me. And then you compound that with the educational crisis in this country right now, and it is a recipe for disaster. You look right now at what an abusive may be too harsh of a word, but what an abusive government does, what it does to small business. Anybody that has run a small business, we all know small business owners. The biggest challenge is not their competition, it's their own government. And draconian, ridiculous regulation, obviously taxation, especially here in Maryland, in all different forms. That's what makes it very difficult for business to thrive in liberal states. And again, which states are going bankrupt? Well, that would be California, that would be Chicago, that would be Detroit, that would be Baltimore to a certain extent. We get a little bit of a pass because of our proximity to Washington, D.C., and New York gets a little bit of a pass because it's New York. But again, every state, every city that travels down that path, we can look into the crystal ball and see where it goes, which is even more of a reason why I think it's important in settings like this that, sure, we want to champion the candidates that we get elected, and that is a big part of what we do in these types of groups, is putting the right candidates forward and promoting conservatism, which is one of the main goals of this group. But then making sure that we hold those that we put in power, we hold them accountable, and make sure that they understand that we're behind them and we want them to move forward on championing the most basic ideals that we believe in, and getting that message out to the electorate, to making sure that people understand, again, what that role of government is. And this ties back into, ladies, what we're seeing right now with the immigration debate. And I'm a Donald Trump supporter. I think, again, I've been in news at the network level for a long time. It may get a little old hearing him talk about fake news nonstop, but he's not wrong. He's not wrong. And I'm telling you this, working with one of the main 4 networks, and they're all guilty of it. I mean, even Fox, to a certain extent, is guilty of it. I've never seen the media treat a president this way, and that's obviously a major challenge that he needs to overcome. But when you pull up to 30,000 feet, again, what is one of the most basic fundamental responsibilities of the federal government? It's border security. I don't think anybody believes building a 2,700-mile wall is the answer to securing the borders. A physical barrier is obviously part of it. Most of the people in this country illegally came here through originally illegal channels and overstayed visas, and it's a more complicated issue than that. But when Trump talks about the wall, that's something that the majority of Americans can easily relate to. And what he proved, if you remember when he announced his candidacy at Trump Tower, the first thing he talked about was illegal immigration. And this country has been begging for it, going back to Ronald Reagan when he cut his amnesty deal for 3 or 4 million people. And it was the same conversation we're having today. Nothing has changed. Going back to 1984, I believe it was. Nothing's changed. Give us amnesty today, whatever that looks like. You'll get border security tomorrow. It was a deal that Reagan did not want to take. but it was the best deal that he could get at the time. Same thing. What are you going to do? You're going to deport 4 million people, and now that number's 15 million. I ran for Congress back in 2006. The number was the same back in 2006 than it is today, which is stunning to me. It's the exact same conversation. And the way it's always been framed, it's, again, us not controlling the rhetoric, the narrative. We don't care about minorities. We don't care about the poor. We don't care about children. We don't care about immigrants. And we allow the opposition to set the pace of the race. We're playing prevent defense. And again, I'm a big fan of Donald Trump. I think he's done a lot of good, but he's caved on this 3 times now. And my mom and I were talking about this in the car coming over. This is really shameful what's happening right now, because he dug his heels in when the temporary government shutdown of 17% of the federal workers. We were a month into that. And other than the media, I think he had the majority of his countrymen behind him on that. And out of the 800,000 government workers that were affected by that temporary shutdown, those are 800,000 Americans, right? Those are 800,000 people that have families, that probably also want border security, that probably also want to live in a sovereign nation, that probably want strong defense. But that never got talked about. And now this will get kicked through the circuit courts and eventually the Supreme Court and get Trump past 2020. And at the end of the day, nothing changes. And it's a shame, because it comes back to what is one of the most basic fundamental responsibilities of the federal government. It is border security. And this is another, probably the greatest example of us not standing up and taking control of words like what is not fair. And that's what we've heard from Trump, from those in the media and the opposition, is he's not compassionate, he doesn't care about the children. It's care very much so. Even more of a reason why, whether it was DACA or various actions under the Obama administration, it was sinful that those actions led to the mass increase of people trying to cross our southern border. And that's what we're trying to clean up right now. Let's take ownership of words like fair. You know what's not fair? The debt that we are leaving on our children is not fair. All of us, I think, understand the consequences that come along with the debt that both parties have run up over the last 3 decades. The majority of Americans, I don't want to say they don't care, but they can't relate to it because it doesn't intimately affect them today. And we live very much in a society with what's going on in our individual lives, what affects us right now today in the here and now. Also, how much money can any of us really legitimately get our hands around? 10 million, 30 million, 100 million, a billion, 100 billion, a trillion, 200 trillion. At some point, you're just adding zeros, and these numbers don't really mean anything. The full faith and credit of the United States, that buys us a lot of slack in the leash, because the world operates off the dollar. But as a famous economist said, anything that can't go on forever won't. And eventually, those chickens will come home to roost. And it doesn't seem very fair that we're leaving that on our children. The number when it comes to debt, and I spent a lot of time over the years on the air talking about debt, because I believe it's really the single greatest threat to this country right now, along with morals and along with immigration. Pat Buchanan, in his book, Suicide of a Superpower, talks about the collapse of societies. I think all of us are probably big defense individuals, but for the most part, societies don't cease to exist because of invasion. They collapse from within. And it's usually about 3 pillars. Morals is one, debt is another, and immigration is usually the third. And the immigration, if we were committed to it, we can get under control. Morals is up to the individual. That will never be legislated. That's not coming from the government. Debt, we may have passed the point of no return on. The number we talk about, what's the national debt right now? 22 trillion, somewhere in that neighborhood. That's not the number. The number is the 235 trillion in things that the government has promised to Americans that are the third rail of politics that you can't take off the table. And of course, what do? We just throw health care on top of that. GDP of the country is only $20 trillion a year. So if you were to seize every penny of every American from the poorest person to Bill Gates, and it would take you 10 years, assuming nobody had any money, we took on no new debt, and we spent no money to break even. It's basic math. It's simply not sustainable. Meanwhile, we have our opposition that's constantly talking about throwing more gasoline on that fire, and then we have Republican candidates that capitulate to it. And that's why for the life of me, I cannot understand how we're even remotely having a conversation about free college right now. It's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. Now, of course, we all want to see kids get educated. We want everybody to get a fair shake in this world. We all want fairness, but we also want kids to, when they graduate high school or college or trade school or whatever their education looks like, to live in a country where they can thrive and be prosperous and start businesses or be able to go work for somebody that has the ability to hire employees. And the government right now is not very conducive to that. And in Baltimore County, and this is a problem that Johnny O is going to be dealing with, which is our AAA bond rating, which is threatened right now. It's a problem, obviously, with the state, with the counties, with the federal government. Nobody's immune from this. In Baltimore County, one of the more affluent counties in the state, our AAA bond rating is in jeopardy. So if there's ever been a time to make the argument on how dangerous our trajectory on debt is, I believe that is right now. Appeasing the left. That doesn't mean that there aren't things that we can't cooperate and work across the aisle on, of course. But that doesn't mean that our Republican candidates or the conservative electorate needs to appease and become Democrat lights. We need to stand up and believe in, again, these very basic core principles that we hold dear, and not only defend them, but champion them.
The idea that government had to protect us came to be accepted during the terrible years of the Depression. Capitalism was said to have failed, and politicians were looking for a new approach. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a candidate for the presidency. He was governor of New York State. At the governor's mansion in Albany, he met repeatedly with friends and colleagues to try to find some way out of the Depression. The problems of the day were to be solved by government action and government spending. The measures that FDR and his associates discussed here derived from a long line of past experience. Some of the roots of these measures go back to Bismarck's Germany at the end of the 19th century, the first modern state to institute old age pensions and other similar measures on the part of government. In the early 20th century, Great Britain followed suit. Under Lloyd George and Churchill, it too instituted old age pensions and similar plans. These precursors of the modern welfare state had little effect on practice in the United States, but they did have a very great effect on the intellectuals on the campus, like those who gathered here with FDR. The people who met here had little personal experience of the horrors of the Depression, but they were confident that they had the solution. In their long discussions as they sat around this fireplace, trying to design programs to meet the problems raised by the worst depression in the history of the United States, they quite naturally drew upon the ideas that were prevalent at the time. The intellectual climate had become one in which it was taken for granted that government had to play a major role in solving the problems, in providing what came later to be called security from cradle to grave. Roosevelt's first priority after his election was to deal with massive unemployment. A public works program was started. The government financed projects to build highways, bridges, and dams. The National Recovery Administration was set up to revitalize industry. Roosevelt wanted to see America move into a new era. The Social Security Act was passed and other measures followed: unemployment benefits, welfare payments, distribution of surplus food. With these measures, of course, came rules, regulations, and red tape, as familiar today as they were novel then. The government bureaucracy began to grow, and it's been growing ever since. The people who get on welfare lose their human independence and feeling of dignity. They become subject to the dictates and whims of their welfare supervisor, who can tell them whether they can live here or there, whether they may put in a telephone, what they may do with their lives. They're treated like children, not like responsible adults. And they're trapped in the system. Maybe a job comes up that looks better than welfare, but they're afraid to take it, because if they lose it after a few months, it may be 6 months or 9 months before they can get back onto welfare. And as a result, this becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, rather than simply a temporary state of affairs. The officials of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare are dedicated people. Their motives are good. Their achievements are not. The results of these programs have been disappointing. Why? I believe that the basic reason is because it is very hard to achieve good objectives through bad means. And the means we have been using are bad in two very different respects. In the first place, all of these programs involve some people spending other people's money for objectives that are determined by still a third group of people. Nobody spends somebody else's money as carefully as he spends his own. Nobody has the same dedication to achieving somebody else's objectives that he displays when he pursues his own. Beyond this, the programs have an insidious effect on the moral fiber of both the people who administer the programs and the people who are supposedly benefiting from it. For the people who administer it, it instills in them a feeling of almost godlike power. For the people who are supposedly benefiting, it instills a feeling of childlike dependence. Their capacity for personal decision-making atrophies. The result is that the programs involve a misuse of money. They do not achieve the objectives which it was their intention to achieve. But far more important than this, they tend to rot away the very fabric that holds a decent society together.
As I looked at the film, I had a growing sense of anger. Anger that that position failed to recognize that the system that was being attacked was necessary in our capitalistic free enterprise system that by its own failure produces poverty and therefore requires governmental intervention in the interest of those people caught in the traps of poverty. So as I sat and looked at the film and as I hear Dr. Friedman's statement, I was aroused to the point, as I said, of anger, because only half the story is told. We are really blaming again a victim, this time a system, the welfare system, for the failure of other systems to operate in the interest of people.
Let's get other reactions now to that statement. Trying to do good with other people's money simply has not worked. The welfare system is rotting away the very fabric of society. Tom Sowell.
My reaction was just the opposite. My anger was at what had been created in the city where I grew up, under very different conditions, during the period of capitalistic failure, during the period when there wasn't this humanitarianism, and where it was possible for people to live better and to get out of that poverty. Now I think someone living in the very same place where I lived would find it much harder to escape from that poverty because of all these things.
When the family fails, when the private sector fails to create jobs at a fast enough rate, you find that people are unemployed and drift into needing help in order to exist. And the welfare system was created in the 30s to do exactly that. When the private sector essentially failed, we have the development of a welfare system. It is not corrupting society, it is taking what society institutions have left behind. The family breaking up, the economy not expanding fast enough, the health system failing, the educational system not doing its job. We have untrained, unskilled people looking for jobs in a highly technical society, or jobs that pay so low that people cannot, in fact, live in a decent level of humanity. I see the welfare system not corrupting, but in fact taking the remains and attempting to help people live in dignity.
So, rotting away the fabric of society is not supported, except perhaps by you. Would you back that phrase?
Absolutely.
So? Yeah.
You're talking about the failures of the other parts of society. What the welfare system and other kinds of governmental programs are doing is paying people to fail. Insofar as they fail, they receive the money. Insofar as they succeed, even to a moderate extent, the money is taken away. This is even extended into the school systems, where they will give money to schools with low scores. Insofar as the school improves its education, the money is taken away, so that you are subsidizing people to fail in their own private lives and become more dependent upon the handouts.
We have expectations built in today about the quality of life, the quality of job, the level of income for which one expects in return. Why? Because we look at the level around us that it takes us to have a fairly decent level.
No, that's not why. I may have all sorts of expectations. The question is, what can I do? If someone else is subsidizing my expectations will be far higher. Insofar as the Center for Advanced Study was subsidizing my expectations a few years ago, I refused to work at UCLA for the normal full professor's salary. Why should I, when I can get the same money for being at the Center for Advanced Study with no hours, no duties, and no classes?
I think it is overly broad to say that we turn people into helpless children.
I don't remember talking to anyone who's ever been on welfare who didn't think they were being treated like children while they were on it.
Of course, one must make a difference, a distinction between the system that was set up to help people and the people who are employed in that system. Look at any public welfare system around the country, and we have practically few trained people to work with people. We employ the ill-trained, people who are not equipped to be helping people. We say they're social workers. They're not social workers. They have neither the skills, the attitudes, and some of them not even the concern. So I think one has to separate out a conceptual framework of a system designed to help people and what the country and community puts into that system to implement those programs.
You mean separate the hopes from the reality?
I separate the skills that are available in order to implement what the objectives of the program are. And I think we have to separate whether we're talking about program objectives or we're talking about how it operates. I would be the first to say that the system that I administered had ill-prepared people to do the job that we were set up to do. But I would not say that the system that we set up...
I've talked to some social welfare people who think that, in fact, they were so hamstrung by the system that there was very little they could do to help people to get off welfare. That is, to build up skills, get jobs, do whatever was necessary to get off welfare. They felt it was the system.
Bob Lappin, you
well,
want to
the
comment?
system that we're stereotyping is one of a great deal of paternalistic interference in individual families' lives.
I've never heard of a government program which was defective, in which the people who ran it didn't say, if only we had more money to spend on what we're not being able to accomplish with the amount we're spending now.
I think the other issue is that you have a whole group of people who are the single female head of a household. And yes, cut off welfare tomorrow. What will they do? What will be their immediate response? At what price to their small children and to their middle-aged children? Yes, they'll get a job. In fact, the statistics show that women, in fact, are the most successful through the employment program. But what has to supplement that typically is the provision of some kind of daycare arrangement. Either the individual woman has to earn enough money to be able to pay privately for her daycare, or in fact she is, quote, subsidized through this insidious corrupting set of programs run by the federal government, which in fact makes her employable and a taxpayer. It's an interesting notion of trying to get people in a productive mode.
Tom Sowell.
It's incredible the way you start the story in the middle, as if there's a predestined amount of poverty, a predestined amount of unemployment, and that the welfare system is not itself in any way responsible for that.
There is a predestined 20% of the bottom half of the population.
I have never, that's always been true. And
There's going to be 20% at the bottom.
Agree with you. It's also true that 20% of the bottom population doesn't have to be living on the government and ruled by the government. You mentioned, for example, the female-headed household. Many of those, in addition to the grown woman who has all the kids, are teenage pregnancies. There's not a predestined amount of teenage pregnancy. I grew up in an era when people, and particularly blacks, were a lot poorer than today, faced a lot more discrimination than today, and in which the teenage pregnancy rate was a lot lower than today. I don't believe there is a predestined amount of teenage pregnancy, a predestined amount of husband desertion. Gutman has done a study of the black family showing that this whole notion that the black family has always been disintegrating, that is nonsense, that his studies go up to 1925, the great bulk of black families were intact, two-parent families up through 1925, and going all the way back through the era of slavery. So it is now only within our own time that we suddenly see this inevitable tragedy which the welfare system says it's going to rush in to solve, but which it is itself a part.
We're talking about a very small group. We're talking about 12% of the families are not intact, are not two-parent families at any one period of time.
I mean among welfare recipients?
No,
or the
among the
large?
public at large. We're talking about 12% of the families. 12%.
That's right.
That's a small number. But
none of those on welfare.
We're still talking about a significant component of the bottom 20% that are the bottom 20%. Whether they are above the poverty line or below the poverty line, they are still the bottom 20%. And the issue is, what is the responsibility of the other 80%, if any, toward those individuals?
Does your program plan to eliminate there being a bottom 20%?
No. But it intends to raise the bottom 20%. So
you're raising them by having more illegitimacy, more unemployment.
I'm not making them have illegitimate children. I hope that's clear.
I think. You don't have to do that. You simply subsidize it.
We as human beings don't have a responsibility, but I hope we have a compassion and an interest in the bottom 20%. And I only want to say to you that the capitalist system, the private enterprise system in the 19th century did a far better job of expressing that sense of compassion than the governmental welfare programs are today. The 19th century, the period which people denigrate as a high tide of capitalism, was a period of the greatest outpouring of eleemosynary and charitable activity that the world has ever known. And one of the things I hold against the welfare system most seriously is that it has destroyed private charitable arrangements which are far more effective, far more compassionate, far more person-to-person in helping people who are really, for no fault of their own, in disadvantaged situations.
Watching the Paul Stefan Show on TV Free Baltimore.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of our program. Today, we're happy to have with us a gentleman that's had an interesting life's journey, which ended up to where he is on this latest stop of that journey is as an actor. And he'll tell us all about where he's been, where he is, and where he's going. And that is Richard Siegelman. Welcome, Richard.
Hey, Paul, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and literally, thank you so much for inviting me here, inviting me onto your show. I really greatly appreciate it.
You're very welcome. It's a lot of response for people looking forward to seeing this, so We better do a good one, huh?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I got, you know, I do have a lot of friends on Facebook and Instagram.
Right.
I mean, I guess it's from the years of the bodybuilding industry and
Right,
the fitness and
right.
physique industry.
Right.
And now, of course, with the acting I've gotten into, you know, developed even a little more of a following.
Oh,
But
great.
and I'm just very, very grateful for everything that I have and everything that has come to me along the way. Yes.
I'd like to start
Yeah.
where people are now to say, okay, tell us with the acting, what are some of your current and recent projects?
Oh, I mean, you got just so much stuff going on. And, you know, the funny thing I'd like to say first is that if someone were to tell me or told me like 3-4 years ago, hey, Rich, you're going to be an actor someday, and you're going to be in movies on the West Coast and the East Coast, and you're actually going to be producing movies, and you're going to be, and I would have laughed. I still laugh every single day, and just kind of like, you know, I get up sometimes in the morning, I'm like, am I really doing this? And it's just so much fun. I'm like a little kid. I'm having so much fun.
Terrific.
I mean, just so much stuff going on right now.
Or a couple projects you
yes,
can mention.
yeah.
Let's say.
So
something you've been in, so people will say, "Oh, he was in that," or "He's
yeah,
going to be in
I
that."
was in Creed 2, of course. Was
Yeah.
filmed. We filmed in Philly on that one, and was there for 3 days. Ended up, I will be, and if you haven't seen it yet, first of all, it's a phenomenal movie. Actually, I think it's better than Creed.
Better than Creed.
Yes, absolutely. And I actually played a Ukrainian boxing official, and I'm in the beginning of the movie with Dolph Lundgren, who is a phenomenal actor and just a super nice person. Got a chance to talk to him, and also Felicia Rashad very briefly.
Right.
Two very nice people, and just had a great time. And so I'm in the corner. I'm actually in the corner during his first son's fight scenes, and yeah, so I did that with Creed 2, and that was a blast, a lot of fun. And you know, we started production on a film called The Driver, which is a mafia movie. Connie Lamoth, who is a wonderful lady,
Yes,
she is the director, writer, and it's a phenomenal script, and producer of this movie. And I actually am lucky enough also to be not only an actor in this movie, but also a producer in it also. So, along with my good friend Johnny Alonso,
Right.
who
Friend of ours, too.
Yes, yes, and I got to tell you, Johnny is one of a kind. I love him to death. He's my paisan. He really is. And if it wasn't for Johnny, I don't think a lot of the opportunity, I would not have gotten a lot of opportunities that I have gotten. And Johnny has actually brought me in on some projects, and Johnny and I now are actually not only acting in some films, but also producing some movies
Right.
also. Right. So I thank Johnny literally for all he's done for me. I've been very lucky, very blessed. Yeah.
And let's say, can you talk about Riddle House?
Riddle House, yeah, that's going to be, we're in production. We just did the trailer for it, and it is going to be a phenomenal movie. Johnny was at Sundance, and he was actually showing the trailer, and it was a huge response for it. People can't wait for us to finish production and for this thing to come out, because it's based on basically, it's a haunted house. And the Riddle House is an actual real house, which is down in Florida.
Interesting.
And Eric Geisler, who's the writer and director and producer, Eric, another individual, just a super nice guy, great director to work with and work for. And Eric just wrote a great script, and he kind of based it off of that. And it just takes Peter Gunn, who is Johnny Alonso's character.
Right.
Peter Gunn, of course, suffers a breakdown from being on tour as a rock star, needs a place to get away, so his agent finds him this house to kind of get away. Agent doesn't know, and people don't know, this is the Riddle House, and it's just a haunted house, and just over the years, people that go into the house never leave.
Oh.
And they all, and it's just...
Like a Hotel California.
Right, yeah, kind of like that. And it's just, it takes through a ride of actually what has happened to some people, and then it brings you to present day with Johnny going into the house, of course, with his co-star, Tracy Faraway, who plays his girlfriend in the movie. Well, technically, she becomes his girlfriend, but in the beginning, she's the daughter of his manager that sets up to put him in this house. And Tracy does a phenomenal job, and along with Sarah French and Robert Mukes and Desi Velez, Lucky Harmon. We had a great time out there. It was a lot of fun. And Eric really, we put this all together, and Eric did a phenomenal job putting this together and getting it out there. So we're very excited about it, yeah.
Now, another thing, talk about the people should know, Amazon Prime series, Family Ties.
Mafia Ties.
Mafia Ties.
Mafia Ties, yeah. So Mafia Ties is the second season, and I was actually contacted by another super nice guy. And, you know, it's funny, and we were sort of talking this briefly before. I have met so many incredibly nice people, and just people that look at this and just say it's all about family. And that's a big thing with like Johnny and myself, and especially with John Wilson, who is the writer, creator, and director of Mafia Ties. It's all about family.
Right.
And just bringing everyone together and working on this together to make it successful. And Mafia Ties, he started, his premises on Mafia Ties is about the Vertelli family. And he kind of bases it loosely on, you know, the Mafia was big in Ohio. It's all filmed in Youngstown, Ohio. And he did the first 3 episodes to see what kind of response he would get for it and put it on Amazon Prime. Huge response. That season 2 is actually going to get underway in March, where my character, Don Vino, is going to be introduced. And I'm like one of the head mob bosses. So I'm really looking forward to that, and looking forward to working with John, because John has just been a super nice guy, and a lot of the cast that I've already spoken to, just great people. Also a good buddy of mine, John Messina, who I worked with on Creed 2, is going to be in this also in Mafia Ties. Looking forward to seeing him and working with him again. It's just going to be a lot of fun. So we start actually episode 4 for season 2. We'll be starting to film sometime in March.
Well,
so I'm looking forward to that.
First 3?
No, the first 3 I was not. No, my character was supposed to be introduced. They were talking about introducing it during episode 3, but then they decided to wait to see response they get from the first 3 episodes, and then my character will be introduced in episode 4.
Now, is this a drama or a comedy?
Oh, it's a drama. It's
heavy, huh?
It's a heavy drama. The Mafia, I mean, kind of like The Sopranos.
Like that.
But you know what? It's even better. So, yeah, folks, you got to really, if you haven't seen it,
see that one.
If you haven't seen it yet, Mafia Ties is really, it's going to be, it's going to be a great one. Yeah.
Well, as far as beginning to work, I'll start with you. Where did you get this interest in acting? I want to know where you got the interest in acting. Yeah.
Never had the interest in acting, so it's kind of funny. Well, you know, and I was in the fitness and physique industry, which I'm still in.
Right.
I was a pro bodybuilder.
We'll get into that.
Which basically got me into emceeing shows, and we'll talk about that more later. So while I was emceeing the shows, a very dear friend of mine, J.M. Mannion, whose dad, Jim Mannion, is president of the IFBB and NPC. Okay. And JM and I have known each other since the 80s. And JM is at all my shows. He's my photographer for all my shows. And when I started emceeing the shows, he started calling me Tony Stark.
Oh.
And I'm like, Tony Stark? And he says, you know, Iron Man. He said, Tony Stark. And after that, everyone now, whenever I MC a show, it's like, hey, there's Tony Stark. And so he said, hey, you know what, you should get into acting. And then another great guy I worked with, Gary Udit, was another one that inspired me to get into the acting and kind of go in that direction, along with a couple other people. So I was home literally, this is funny, so it's February, a little more than 2 years ago.
Okay.
It's snowing outside, and I'm watching a movie that was made in the Bronx. It was with Andy Garcia. Now, originally, I'm from the Bronx. I'm from New York.
Okay.
And watching this movie, and I had seen it a long time ago with my mom, back in like 2009 is when it was made. And it was Andy Garcia, and it was called City Island.
Okay.
And basically what it is that Andy Garcia plays this prison guard in the movie, and it's kind of like it's a comedy type movie. He plays this prison guard, but he's always aspired to be an actor.
Oh.
So he keeps it from his family, from his wife and his kids, and he tells his wife that he goes out on Thursdays to go bowling or play poker with his buddies. So of course his wife thinks there's something up, and he said, you know, she thinks he's cheating on her. So anyway, to make a long story short, he goes through the movie and he's taking these acting lessons. Alan Arkin is his acting instructor in the movie. It's a great movie if you haven't seen it yet. City Island. And at the end of the movie, he gets this audition. One of the people that he's with in the acting class pushes him towards doing this audition for a Martin Scorsese film with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino.
Wow.
So he goes to the audition. The line is like all the way around the block, and he gets picked out of the crowd because, you know, they're running out of time to bring people in. And he goes and auditions, and he's awful, terrible. He tanks the audition. He tries to be like Marlon Brando, and it's just not working. But they liked his look.
Yeah.
So while he's there, the casting director there and the other person that was operating the camera try and talk him into, hey, you know what? What do you do for a living? And he says what he does, and he says, well, the biggest thing that you need to do is just be yourself. How do you act being a prison guard? So he does that, and he ends up being this totally different person and actually a really good actor. So long story short, he gets the role, and it's a great movie. And so when the movie's over, I'm kind of sitting there, and I'm looking outside. It's snowing out, and I'm like, hey, you know what? I can do that. So I literally get on the internet and start looking for acting coaches in the area, in Baltimore area. And, excuse me, and I come across John Casablanca's acting and modeling agency. And, you know, for that you have to like go audition for it and a whole bit. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? So I put in, you fill this application out and you send off. They want to know if you got headshots. So I sent off a couple of these pictures I had. I didn't have headshots. I didn't have any of that stuff. I had no resume. They wanted a resume. I didn't have a resume. I filled this thing out and sent pictures on and send it out. Never heard anything for, I'd have to say a good month maybe. So now my mom and I are driving to New York. So we go to New York every year to visit grave sites of my family, my mom's parents, my dad's parents, and you know, we see relatives up there while we're out there because you know, my mom's born, raised New York, and myself too. So, you know, we go up there, and as I'm driving up there, the phone rings, and it's an odd number, and my mom's like, "Can you answer it?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I'll answer it." So, it's this lady, and she says she's from John Casablancas, and saying, "You know, we're interested in you coming for an audition." And my big thing was, "Okay, how much does this cost?" I said, "What is it going to cost?" And my mom's like, "Stop it, stop, and just listen to her." And so I do, and she says, "You know, really interested in you coming in for an audition because not everyone gets into the school," and which I learned not everybody does. So I said, "Fine, send me the information email, and you know, I'll." So at that time, I'd already kind of like lost interest, I guess, in the acting thing. But then I was like, again, I'm home, and they send me the information, and I'm looking at the email. So I do. I'm like, you know what? It was a Thursday night, and my mom calls me that Monday when we're home already, and she goes, "You're going to the audition on Thursday?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She says, "Why just go? It's like 6 o'clock at night. You're not doing anything. Just go." So I went, and I get there, and it was a big room, and there must have been, I'd have to say, about 60-something people in this room, and they're all like these young kids, and here's Rich at, you know, an older age, let's say that, right? As an older age. And I'm sitting around looking at these kids, and they're all good-looking kids, and some are with parents, and some are, you know, teenagers or young adults, and good-looking kids that, you know, they look like they belong there, and I'm like, I don't belong here, and I'm waiting. And they give me another form to fill out, and I fill it out, and I'm sitting and waiting, and I'm like, you know what? I'm leaving. I said, this is not. And I get up, and as I'm getting ready to leave, they call my name to go back. So I'm like, yeah, here I am. She said, well, just go around the corner and everything, take your paperwork with you, and there's going to be a room to go into. And it was set up just like an audition, and now that I've been on hundreds of auditions already. I had the camera set up on the tripod. There was the mark where to stand. There was the casting director behind a desk and someone operating the camera. And you know, I introduced myself, and she says, "Do you have your paperwork?" So I gave her the paperwork, and she goes, "Do you have your headshots with you?" And I'm like, "No." She goes, "Do you have a resume?" And I'm like, "Nope." And she's kind of looking at me like, you know, like, who is this guy? This guy must be out of his mind.
Right.
So then she goes, "Okay." She said, "That's fine. Let's not worry about that now." She says, "Well, this is an audition to be considered to get into the school." And she goes, "So you're going to do a cold read." And Paul, I didn't know what a cold read. What is a cold read? And I'm like looking at her, cold read? And she goes, you know what a cold read is? And I said, no, I don't know what a cold read is. She said, hey. So she hands me, it's a short little paragraph thing. She said, cold read is basically, I'm giving this to you. You can read it over real quick, and then I'm going to say 3, 2, 1, action, and you're going to act out the scene.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, right, whatever, you know? So she's like, well, you ready? And I look at it real quick, and she's like, 3, 2, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, I haven't even finished. She said, it's a cold read. She said, I'm giving you, look it over real quick now. She said, because and she goes, 3, 2, 1, action. I dropped the paper on the ground, and from my experience of being an MC, it was a cold read for a commercial, and I really don't remember what the commercial was. But between what I had briefly took in from what I looked at, and then from improving, I guess, from being an MC on stage, I did this audition, and when I was done, she looks at me like, she goes, you never acted before? And I said, no. She goes, what do you do for a living? I said, well, I MC shows, and that's about it. I said, I'm not an actor, I'm not a model, I'm not, I'm just me. That's it. And she's like, wow, huh. She says, I said, do me a favor, go across the hall, we have a photographer there, we want to take some headshots of you. And they did that, and she says, and I want you to go back and sit in this other room and just wait. So I waited till like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whatever. Long story short, they took the 60 people, ended up getting down to 15, and then from that 15, already I'm looking at my watch and I'm getting tired, and I'm like, oh good, I'm going to go home, they're not going to pick me. Some of the 15, it ended up being like about 8 or 9 of us, and it was kind of like a callback thing, and then you went back the next day, and long story short, I got accepted. Got my initial training from John Casablancas, great group of people. They taught me, how to put resume together, where to get, the headshots, and how to audition, types of auditions that I'd look into, that I'd end up seeing, and dealing with directors, casting directors, and just acting, improv, and it was about 6 months I went through it. And after about the first 3 months, they say, if you want to start, because after 3 months, you've already taken the classes where you put your headshots together and your resume and everything. And they said, okay, well, there are plenty of different internet websites to go on now and look. Said, why don't you try and get stuff? So I was like, gung-ho. I'm like, hey, I'm going to do this. So out of all my class members, I'm the only one right now that's actually, and they actually use me now to bring other potential actors and actresses into their school. They use me as an example, and I visit up there all the time, and they treat me like this big star now, and I'm like, I'm just, I just been barely in the industry, I guess, 2 years, and it's just been an amazing ride. It really has, and I've really enjoyed myself. Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say first, like you said, when you talk about going into that office for the first time, see all those kids, I say, for somebody to just start acting, at a more mature age, is not something that usually happens.
No, and the example I guess I can give is, Morgan Freeman. Look at Morgan Freeman started, I guess, when he was in his late 40s or something like that, early 50s. And, it's just something I just took an interest to after being pushed along into it, to a point now where I look at it and, I wake up every morning and it's like, am I really doing this for a living? I get emails and contacted. I have just casting directors and producers sending me emails or calling me, hey, we got this project we're working on. You have got this very distinct, or you have this look that we're looking for. And I'm just like, hey, okay. So I go for auditions, and and it's just been so bizarre. It really has.
It's interesting. It sounds like something when you were a kid, say, I want to be an actor.
Yeah, when you were a kid. Like, but it's funny. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a police officer. And I did. That's what I did for a living. For 20 years, I was a police officer. I wanted to be a police officer. I wanted to chase bad guys. So that's what I did.
But the thing about the acting, I want to bring that up. Because you've had a lot of different life experiences, which we'll touch on, we can't go in depth on.
Yeah.
To say, what do you think from like previous career or life experience that you've had that help you to be a better actor?
Oh, it'd have to be while I was on the police department, so I was very blessed. My career, did an amazing career for a department in the state of Maryland. And it was the City of Rockville Police Department in Montgomery County. And the Montgomery County Police Department had a special, they had a unit. It was a federal it was called the Federal Narcotics Drug Task Force Tactical Drug Enforcement Unit. And they took officers from the different agencies in the state of Maryland, and you basically got deputized to, you know, for like federal powers. And we worked with the federal government, and I was basically on this Federal Narcotics Task Force, and I went all over. I was thrown out on the street. I'll never forget, Fred Foose was my sergeant, and I miss those days because it was back in the 80s when crack started becoming very big. And my first day, I was on the department not even 3 years, and I was sent to, you know, work for this unit. And my first day there, like, hey, good, first day, fresh meat, you're going to buy dope on the street and make an arrest. And I'm like, oh, what? And it was such a rush doing it. And that's my acting experience, because I became a drug addict, and in the sense, because I had to act like a drug addict to buy dope on the street, to buy drugs, and hung out with drug dealers. And for those years that I did it, I became what I hated most. I became disgusting drug addict, to the point where a lot of times it was hard to come out of that part when I got home. And a lot of times it was hard to like not bring it home with you. I had real long hair, long goatee, and it was a lot of fun, an amazing time. Dangerous, but I never thought about, literally, you really never think about it. And,
right, so really you didn't go deep undercover, but you were kind of like an undercover agent.
Oh, it was kind of, there was some, not deep undercover, but there were some things where I was working. I'd have a informant, a UC, introduce me to a big-time drug dealer, and I'd have to get in there and get a good couple of buys before I can get a judge to do a search warrant. And yeah, it was a lot of fun, but that's how I got my acting experience initially, because
right, that's
I had
acting.
to act.
I mean,
Yeah, it was acting.
You have to pretend to be somebody else,
right?
And you
exactly.
have to sell it to the bad guys.
Exactly.
You're one of them.
Yeah.
And that's one way
exactly.
in which you got it. I would think that then I would say, you know, you had a distinguished career, 20 years,
yes.
you know, and now how did you, or what was the interest in getting into bodybuilding?
So bodybuilding, since I was a teenager in high school, we used to, it was funny, it's a group of us. It was Tony DeLuca and Victor Fernells and just all of us from high school, the high school days. And Tony's brother Darren DeLuca, we were all close friends, and we all, you know, played sports in high school, baseball, football, and you know, we got into lifting weights. And back then, you know, we had our own weight sets in the basement. And, you know, they were the old plastic weights with the sand in them. So we had the T-shirts, Pumping Plastic. And, you know, it was back when Arnold, and there was the Olympias back then in the 70s, and Pumping Iron came out. And, you know, we all wanted to be big. And, you know, the bodybuilding magazines were big. And so while I was in high school and playing sports, I got into the weightlifting, and it took me until when I was 19 years old. I competed in my first show.
Wow.
And the man that got me involved in it, and we're still close friends to this day, is Ned Drew, who now actually is retired, lives out in L.A., but he was a former Mr. America. And he was my first coach. And Ned and I talk literally, not as frequent as I'd like, but Ned's a super nice guy. And he's like, I think he's close to 80 now, but he's in phenomenal shape still. And so Ned got me, I did my first show to Teenage DC. And I got fourth. But getting up there on stage and just doing your routine and the way you get your body to transform into what it looks like, I was bit by the bug, and that's all I wanted to do was compete. So I competed literally from 1984 until I started on the police department in 87, and I did one more show in 1989, but then I went to narcotics, couldn't do it anymore. So, and then picked back up on bodybuilding. Once I retired, I got in with my group of buddies that we all trained together, like back in the 80s at Gold's Gym. Kevin White and Steve McLeod, all of us, we were like big time into it. And, you know, all we wanted to be were pro bodybuilders. So I heavily got back into it when I retired back in 2004. Won the Maryland State, took my class at another show, and then I started winning shows, and before you knew it, I turned pro. And, you know, it was like, who doesn't want to be a pro athlete, you know? So, and originally, my biggest dream was, I was a baseball player in high school, and played in college and played semi-pro for 3 years, and that was my big dream. And unfortunately, you know, never made it in baseball, but hey, you know, I did it in bodybuilding, just watching your body transform, and from that took me, you know, into the industry where now I actually promote and produce shows for the NPC and the IFBB. And that's thanks to, of course, you know, Jim Mannion, the president, and Gary Udit, who've been so good to me over the years. And, of course, J.M. Mannion, who's the one, of course, egged me on to get me into the acting. So, and I've just met so many great people along the way with that that have given me opportunities in that industry to promote shows and to MC shows. Literally, Gary Udit gave me the opportunity to start emceeing some of the big national shows, and you know, I did very well, and they kept asking me back, and from there other promoters saw how I would MC and perform on stage and say, hey Rich, can you come MC my show, or can you do, and literally another great promoter, Jack Titone, I've become very friendly with. He's in the Midwest in St. Louis and Arkansas, and I do his shows and MC his shows now. And now I also got another good promoter, Gene Goody in Kentucky. So I'm like all over the place now, emceeing shows. Not only am I acting now, I mean, I'm emceeing. I'm just like, February right now is my month so far to kind of take it easy, because once March hits, forget about it. I'm just going to be all over the place all year. Right. But that's what I like, though. I like being busy.
I think the acting, though, again, when I asked the question about the things you've done.
Yeah.
Now, bodybuilding, you can tell me right or wrong or add to it, that helped you with a couple of things for acting.
Sure.
Discipline.
Yeah.
Posing and actually being on stage in front of an audience that's really looking at you critically, the judges and the audience. Because, you know, for an amateur like me, if you watch, you say, well, how can you tell the difference? All these guys really look cut. How can they tell who's first, second, and third? What are the little subtleties that the judges pick at? And so to be looked at with really almost through a microscope,
it is.
You got to be used to that. Like, you know, like when the camera lens is there seeing you, and you're going to be up there 70 feet on a big screen, that way you're not problem with an audience, because you're used to being examined.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, because I guess, again, from when I was, you know, in a police department, I never had a problem just being in front of people. And again, my Chief Treshik, not only did I did narcotics, when I went actually the final part of my career back on the street, I was the one that he chose to talk the big public speakings and talk to, you know, 300-400 people at a time to talk about identifying dangerous drugs, what to look for with your teenagers and drugs. And I just never had a problem talking to people. And, you know, being on stage when you're competing, it's funny. You don't see anybody. You really don't. You just up there, and you just do your thing. And again, it's just it's an incredible feeling just even being up there. Like it is now being behind the camera. You really don't. I don't think about it. The first couple of things I did, I was nervous, and you get nervous in the beginning, but then you're like, you get up there and you don't think about it, and you just, you know, you try and you work at becoming that character, becoming that person, or developing that character. So, and then you just become somebody different. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was going to say the emceeing too had to help with ad-libbing.
Oh, absolutely,
So, because again, being in front of an audience, that way you have the audience's attention then. You know, and that's.
Oh, and the shows, you talking not hundreds but thousands of people just with their eyes looking right at you.
Right.
So yeah.
Now, didn't you also? I don't know if you still do, but didn't you also do real estate?
You know what? I got my real estate license. It's funny. Again, it's before I started acting. And I was kind of like, what do I want to do now? I'm like the kind of person, I guess, that, and I try and tell people this, that you can do whatever you want to do, but it's not going to come easy. You know, everybody thinks that, you know, hey, I can do this or I'm going to do that, and they think it's going to be handed to them. You have got to work hard to do whatever it is that you want to achieve in life. But if you put in the time, the effort, and you work hard towards something, you can do anything. And the real estate was, you know what, hey, you know what? A good friend of mine does real estate, and she suggested that, you know, hey, why don't you get in real estate? You know, there's good good money in it. She's doing really well. I said, yeah, sure. And then when I found out, this is a hard school, you know, going through the school and then to study for the test. It's a two-part exam. And I literally, so when I got through with the school, I went through school through Coldwell Banker, and they say register for the test right away so you don't forget everything you learned. But they go through stuff. It's like a fast-track course that you have got to read through these books. And when you talk about dry reading, it's awful. I mean, just terrible. And so it's a two-part exam, so I literally registered for it right away. A month after I took the class was the first one available. It was down in Salisbury, Maryland. So I went down to my place. I have a place in Ocean City. So I went down for a week, and before the test, locked myself in my place down there in Ocean City, spread out all my notes literally in the dining room, in the kitchen area, in the bedrooms, all over the place. And I'd walk around, and I'd study for 10, 12 hours a day for this test and read the books. And that's all I did for a week. And I went and took the exam, and everyone says, hey, don't worry about it. First time you don't pass. So I'm telling my mom, I said, you know, I'm going to try the best I can. But everyone says it's hard to pass both parts, and you come close. And so I took the test, and yeah, when it started, you sit in a room, they put you in this room, and you start taking the test. And I'm like, oh, my God, this is hard. And I'm looking, I said, I don't remember. But you get through it. It took my time. I just barely got through it, and I got through it right under the time limit. And they tell you right there, as soon as you're done, you walk out, you go in this room, and they're tabulating on a computer. And they look at me. It was two gentlemen that were running the school there, and a bunch of people still taking the test in the room. They go, congratulations, Mr. Siegelman. You have done something that's very rarely done. You've passed both parts first time. Wow. Welcome to real estate. So now I did all this hard work and did everything, and my buddy Jay Wise, it's my real estate license hangs at his office down in Ocean City, and then I got into acting, so I did nothing with it.
Oh, because I was going to say, if you had done any of it, again, there's an element of acting there because you have to sell a property.
Right. Yeah.
And you also have to sell yourself because why am I going to buy from this agent instead of this agent because the property is listed with all kinds of agencies.
Oh, no, you're right. And, you know, it's funny, one of my favorite shows is the LA listing, the real estate show they have on now that's based out of LA. And I watch it all the time. It's on Bravo, I think it is. Yeah, I just never had the chance because I never thought I'd be this busy in acting.
Right.
And even now, my emceeing has picked up so much that I have no time to do real estate. I just don't. So my license still hangs at my buddy Jay Wise's place and down in Ocean City, and it'll continue to hang there until, you know, eventually, maybe someday, maybe, but, you know, at this point, probably never, although I put in all this hard work and effort to get my real estate license, I'll probably never do anything with it.
And the other thing with life is that I've had a few people in here that have made kind of like mid-life or mid-career kind of changes, you know, and you're one of those. It's an example, as opposed, it's almost like you say, and you did say, I think not on camera, you kind of fell into acting.
Yeah,
it wasn't an ambition that you were going for this.
That's never,
you know, other people were saying, hey, Rich, try it.
No,
and
no one ever told me, hey, Rich, you should be an actor, or you should get into acting. And it's like, you know, we talked about, you know, my father, who I miss dearly. And, yeah.
So what is the secret to this phenomenal success? There are people who are envious of you, I would say. Let's say there's a guy who might be your age and say, you know, I've been trying this for 30 years and I don't have the success he's had in 2.
People do say, and I've come across, say, how do you, I mean, literally, I'm SAG eligible for my SAG card now, union. It took me 2 years. It takes people a lifetime. Yeah. And some don't ever get it. Now I'm after 2 years.
But have you given some thought to that to say, you know, what has been the secret of your success?
I honestly got to say that it's probably a lot of it's maybe right place at right time. Again, just being blessed with some of the people that I've come across in the industry already, so many nice people that I've literally fell into. And and a lot of it's, you know, it's the hard work and paying off and doing the auditions and working at the craft. And it's like we said, you know, when I get auditions for roles to play a Russian or play an Iranian that speaks Farsi or whatever, I lock myself in my place and I make sure I learn it before I go out there and do the audition. And that's what you have to do. You have to perfect your craft. And I'm always learning, though. I'm still, you know, I went to an master's acting class with John Pilato, who's an excellent acting coach. And he's taught me some stuff along the way. And I've just had a chance to work with so many amazing producers and directors, literally with Connie Lamoth and Eric Geisler and Marky Dixon, who I became friends with over a year ago, and he has done some stuff out in L.A., and he's now actually directing and producing this acting TV show that I'm a part of, and did an episode already of that. And Marky Dixon, what a super nice guy, and it's just like, I've met all these nice people in history. Everybody tells me about, you know, I hear the stories about how this one and that one, and I haven't seen it. I just haven't seen it. I've been very lucky and very blessed to come in contact with some amazing people. Yeah.
Well, great. Now, what do you see? Do you have any future goals or thought about it?
My future goals are literally is to continue, of course, in the acting, and now, of course, I'm also with Johnny Alonzo producing movies.
Right.
I would love one day, as you know, a lot of these actors become directors, and I do. I pay it, and that's how I learned how to promote and produce bodybuilding shows. I kind of pay attention. I never went to school for it or anything,
Right. Sure.
but I watch. I'm a good visual learner, I guess you can say. Love to direct one day. Yeah.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah.
Now, what we want to do is have you look in that camera and tell people how they can find out more about you, your contact information.
Oh, you can find out about me if you want any questions all about what I'm doing or anything. You can actually shoot me an email at Kutz, and that's K-U-T-Z as in zebra, promo, P as in Paul, R-O-M as in Mary O, kutzpromo@gmail.com. My website for my shows, you can go to my name. It's www.richsiegelman.com. Or yeah, those are the best ways. You can contact me. I don't think I'm gonna give my phone number. Actually,
No, don't do that.
I'm not gonna do that. So no.
No, we don't.
But yeah, but please, you know, and I've actually helped a couple of also aspiring actors or actresses. Also, please, if you got any questions about the industry, what to look for and what's going to happen, different types of auditions that you're going to go on, or whatever it is, or just to kind of get that kickstart, because I love helping people. I really do, because you know, I'm thankful for all the help that I've received, and I like to give. I like to give back.
Terrific.
So please, yeah, send me an email, kutzpromo@gmail.com, and I'd be more than happy to respond to it, and more than happy to help you out. Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah.
We want to thank you for being here.
Thank you,
and
Paul.
It's been great just to have you. And that message you give, we all should be giving back all the time.
Yes, and it's all about giving back, and it's all about family.
Right.
It really is. Family's key.
That's true.
Yeah.
I agree.
And I do appreciate, again, thank you so much, Paul, for having me.
You're welcome.
I greatly appreciate it. Yes,
You're
great
very
opportunity for me. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And folks, that will be the end of tonight's program, and hope you enjoyed meeting Rich Siegelman, and be sure to watch out for his Amazon Prime series and all the films that he has coming out, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about this actor in the future. And if you like bodybuilding, please go to one of his shows, which will be at the BWI Hilton in March, and also in June and I think October.
Yeah,
so
all three.
Pay attention. So until next time, this is Paul Stefan saying, see you then.
You're watching The Paul Stefan Show on TV Free Baltimore. watching The Paul Stefan Show on TV Free Baltimore.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of our show. And tonight, our guest is a woman who's multi-talented. She has been a casting director for 28 years, believe it or not. And she's done things in film, like The Pelican Brief and True Lies and the movie Beloved. She's done a lot of work in television, as well as government films, commercials, things like that, and House of Cards, most notably, on television. But she's also been a producer, a director, a writer, and once or twice at least, an actress. And so we're very happy to have with us this evening Kimberly Skyrme. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay, let me ask you another question to start here is, what do you think of as the qualities or characteristics of a good casting director?
What a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. Personally, I think you need to love creativity and you have to be intuitive. You are a storyteller, which is why I always say that I'm a storyteller, because it's just turned into a lot of different areas, but one of the most important ones is really the actors. So I think you need to be intuitive, I think you need to be creative, and also one of my personal hallmarks is that you need to think outside the box.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure we can elaborate on that later.
I'm sure we could. I mean, because I think what I've done in a series here is talk to people both in front of and behind the screen, so that people who watch the videos can see it's more than just what you see out there. And even a director such as Alfred Hitchcock said, you know, a movie might be 75% the casting. So casting director, or whoever he or she may be, are vital to a film, where a lot of people say, they don't even think about that. You know, oh, it says Lynn Stallmeyer casting or something. You know?
Well, it's such a vital part. I mean, they're the actors are the people that are bringing the story to life. So if they aren't just perfectly cast, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. And if the puzzle doesn't fit together, the puzzle doesn't fit together.
Even though some may say if the actor or actress is good enough, they can kind of, you know, be a chameleon like a Meryl Streep, but they're pretty rare.
Yes, and that takes a lot of good work.
And so we'll ask again, how soon do you come in the process?
Depending on the nature of the film, I think some casting directors will start very early on. In the independent arena, the sooner the better, because you're really helping to, I think, creatively shape the story. And you could find a local stage actor that, you know, is won numerous awards at Center Stage or Helen Hayes or, you know, Arena Stage, and you want to start that process very early. Now, on a studio film, the casting director typically is going to come in after one or two of the stars have been attached, because in most cases, the producer or the studio would bring those people to the table, but they're going to still bring you in quite early in the process to round out whoever that marquee name is that's helping with the funding. But that's still, again, in the independent arena, you'll want to add one or two of those people as well. So for sure, in the independent arena, the sooner the better. It's a very important collaborative piece that I think if you have not been introduced to the idea in film school, that it's really worth doing the research and finding that, because, as I've said, one of my hallmark things is that, you know, thinking outside the box and non-traditional casting, so you can really enhance your story by having another creative partner with you.
And then coming into the process, when you come into it, how soon do you usually get the script, or as far as...
Well, it's usually the first thing after a phone conversation that I would ask for, because I'd love to read it and see where they're going, and then I can't help myself, because even if I was just hired to do the casting, I will then give them some script notes and ideas on, you know, how we can all make the story better. So,
and are directors receptive to that?
Fortunately, I think if you introduce things in the right way, we'll always... I've always had receptive directors. But I found the right way to, again, collaborate with them and introduce a new idea, as opposed to say, I think that this is what you should be doing. It's just something else to explore. And any creative person is always going to explore avenues that may enhance the film, and then have typically kind of changed people's ideas, which is good.
Yeah, I think, that's brought that word up, the collaborative process with the director. The director, whoever he or she may be, need to be open, I think, to your suggestions. How much degree of freedom you usually get on a project with your suggestions, or do they say, no, I don't want that person, I want that person? after you've said, I want this person?
Well, fortunately, I think after this many years in the career, usually, and actually my entire career, I've been referred to people. So there's some inherent relationship that was involved in the introduction. So you now already have an established relationship that they're trusting your ideas. So I have found that because of that relationship, they were open to the idea that I might suggest, and then in the end, they're typically happy. And I have had the occasions where they don't pick the person that intuitively, again, I talked about the intuition, that intuitively I thought someone, should be selected, that if things fell through, or then they changed their mind, they would come back and say, oh, I think I want that person. And then I would usually tell them later, that was kind of the person I told you about in the first place. So then you win somebody over then, and now they really feel secure with your choices. And I have had a couple of directors that I've worked with that said I could never do it without you, because I know that you understand what it is that I want. And I did have one director one time say, don't do what I say, do what you know I mean.
Okay.
So that was very important information. Thank you, Marty.
There you go.
So it's words I've lived by then. So I do, listen to what they have to say, but I read between the lines and maybe, the essence of the story they're trying to tell.
Yeah. Now, I noticed some of your credits to say, I don't know, you've been like the main casting director like on a major film, because a lot of times it'll say that, or the TV series, it'll say local casting director.
Yes.
So when they go on location, they expect you to find the regional actors and actresses for a project.
Yes.
So have you ever done like, the main casting director
Which I have
for a major
on,
project?
on independent films, and then very frequently in the area have been the local casting director finding speaking roles for various different things. And by having that local person, just one of the examples that was very interesting was Deep Impact. They had a lot of international reporters, and they were really looking for one or two different languages, but I knew there was a couple of different people that spoke multiple languages, and very specifically one actor. So I had him audition in several different languages, and so in the end, the 2 or 3 that they were looking for, we ended up having like 5 different languages being spoken, because I had introduced the idea that we could have these multiple languages. So by having a local person who really knows the talent, you can, again, even enhance something that they are thinking 1 or 2, and then, we can have 5. And of course, we're employing more actors, so I always love doing that.
Because I know that, with people coming from the West Coast, they obviously don't know the talent pool over here in the DMV, and don't you have to keep up on who's out there?
You do, but fortunately I love that. That's a great part of the job, that you go to the theater, you go to local auditions, and then fortunately being a member of CSA, which is Casting Society of America, you're referred based on the areas in which you live. So they also can put you in touch with casting directors who have been, again, hired by the studio or by the producers, so that you can help enhance.
Right, because I know I mentioned Lynn Stelmar, our master, but also locally for us here in Baltimore, we have Pat Moran.
Pat's been here for a number of years.
If you know her at all.
Yes, I have. I've met her on a number of occasions, and fortunately had the opportunity of, the first time I met her was on the premiere of Serial Mom, that an actor friend of mine was in, and I got to go be the +1 to go. So I met her a very long time ago, because that film was a while ago.
Now I was wondering, somebody like her, do you have people in your industry who've been either role models or mentors for you?
Wow, what an interesting question. Because I started in a smaller market like this, I really didn't work directly for long periods of time underneath other folks. So I've been a bit of a renegade, and I thank my first acting professor from American University, Gail Humphreys-Mondrosian, who commented that I had really kind of created my own style of casting. So I really have, just been out there doing the 40 miles of rough road by myself. So I appreciate that I have visually watched other people's, creative casting, but I really have, again, kind of done my own thing.
Have you learned by doing then? I mean, so
yes, I think I feel like I learned the most about casting by watching the prolific directors that I have had the opportunity to work under. I mean, you mentioned beloved Jonathan Demme was, I think a mentor in the way that he worked with actors and also worked with his crew, but Sidney Pollack and then also beloved Alan Pakula that I worked with on the Pelican Brief was just really interesting people to talk to and watch the way they were directing talent. I think that really informed a lot of my casting was by looking at the way the directors were working with them and understanding that relationship that is the thing that you need to learn about in the casting process.
I was going to say, early in your career, you got to work with a few giants, you see. Because I had somebody in here whose job is he's a grip, and he does a lot of stuff in the area. And his name is Kenneth Morton. And
I know
he talked about, I asked him who his favorite director was, and he said Jonathan Demme. Because he said there was a thing where there was something going on.
Actually, I believe he also worked on Beloved. I think that's actually the first time I met Kenny.
You know, Jonathan Demme helped move stuff on the set and stuff like that. Well, you're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to do that. He says, look, we're a family. We're all doing this film together. You know, I'll move this prop or whatever he was doing. He wasn't just the mighty director who storms on the set just before action.
Right. No. Yes. So that was a very special movie.
I'm sure it was for you. Now, what about casting decisions? What criteria do you base it upon? When you're casting?
Again, another lovely question. I think that depends on the nature of the show, really. That, you know, in some cases you're going to have something, like if you were talking about, well, even on House of Cards, that if somebody's going to play an attorney or play a doctor or play a physical therapist, to find an actor who perhaps in their life has actually done that, they're just going to enhance the performance. So that if somebody knows how to be a trial lawyer and all things are equal, you have, you know, two talented actors, but one has been a trial lawyer, chances are the trial lawyer is really going to enhance the performance, in the same with physical therapy or being a doctor or even just being a linguist. You know, if someone is playing a character from a different country and they happen to be bilingual, they're going to understand phraseology and how somebody who English isn't their first language speaks. So I think really tapping into, which I ask actors a lot of trick questions. It's not really a trick question. I just ask them what they do when they're not acting, and often it feels like a trick question because it really helps me understand who they are to better cast them when those kinds of things come along with the criterion. Or if there's going to be a lot of children in the film. No, some people like children and some people do not. So knowing that would also, you know, perhaps enhance the patience. I mean, if you're not used to being around kids, then you may not want to be in a movie like Kindergarten Cop.
No, true.
So knowing that, I think,
so that's
is
one
helpful.
thing. And I guess when you're looking at actors, sound like maybe you actually use people even who maybe had no previous acting experience. If they're lawyers, they're reporters, whatever. That's their day job.
Right.
But you're going to have them be on camera or do a few lines or something and get those
if
parts.
you're really, I've had numerous reporters actually play reporters because that's what they do, and you're going to be given a script that's very similar to what you do every day. So I don't think the breadth of your skills need to be that diverse. But then again, if it's an actor who needs to, for example, a local feature that I produced and cast, we needed to have good acting, but there needed to be some kind of sports acumen, because we were putting them into the Potomac River to actually swim at a triathlon. So if you could not swim at all, then you really honestly couldn't be considered, because you would just be in harm's way actually in the triathlon swimming with other athletes. So although they didn't have to be experts and had completed a triathlon, they at least needed to be able to bike, run, and swim with some ability.
Yeah, I was going to say, though, when you're looking too, I mean, you sort of alluded to it, but do you look at, let's say, physicality for a part? For example, we need a tall, muscular guy, or we need this female who can play a femme fatale, or, you know, or a certain voice that you might be looking for, a vocal quality or range.
Which I love that you asked that question, because sometimes those things are very specifically written into the script.
Oh, they are.
But that, again, intuition and creativity I was talking about, if I know an actor that can really enhance the character and maybe none of the above, that I will also introduce that idea. And that oftentimes, actually, a film I'm working on right now, one of the kind of technical computer guys is written as a 20-something, but I have this favorite actor of mine that he always gets cast as kind of the scary, creepy people just because he's bald, but he's so talented. So I love putting him in non-traditional things. The last thing I worked on, he was the funny doctor, because he never gets cast as a funny guy, but he's really funny. And I just felt like it's much more interesting if there's an older techie guy. So, you know, he's going to be playing the tech guy, even though it was written as a 20-something, because we're all of us old people. We can still be good at technology. It doesn't only get to be the 20-year-old. So I really do. Although things are written, I always cast outside, the box
outside the
is one of
box,
the options. And recently I did casting for the Girlfriend Experience, and although due to tax incentives they stayed in Toronto and did not actually come and shoot in DC because it was too expensive. But I had introduced the idea that you didn't have to have a 40-year-old white male playing that role, and in the end it was a very diverse group that they brought for callbacks, as opposed to just the 40-year-old white male they were looking for.
Now, wasn't there also a project where you changed the director's mind or something? I think it had to do with somebody who was supposed to play a prostitute or something. And,
oh yeah, that was a great one, and that was Scott Hicks on what was that? Goodness, it was in Virginia, and I'm trying to think. So I worked with Scott Hicks, and it was Hearts in Atlantis.
Okay.
And so he needed to have a prostitute, but it was a period film. So this was the 60s. So obviously there's going to be a specific difference between a prototype of a woman who's a prostitute in the 70s as opposed to the 60s. And he wanted to have, kind of mid-20s. And so as we were going through the process, and just as he was about ready to walk out the door, he turned back and he said, but I think she needs to have a really great voice because she's going to be in an alley. And so the voice is going to be really even more important, I think, because it's going to be a silhouette, and it was a really moody scene. And I said, well, I know this actress has an amazing voice, but she's 50, if you'd like to see her. And he said, bring her in. And in the end, she got the role.
See that? I mean, that's where I think comes maybe from who you are even before. We're going to talk about it a little bit. Who you were before you became a casting director, because you're able to not stick into stereotypes. Like that, the example of the techie, because you watch TV shows, oh, you have the young guy or young girl doing this.
And I assure you, when you see this movie, he's fabulous.
Okay, and then and for example, I mean, that would be great because you talk about you've had people who've been involved in that kind of technology. Some of them it's been around for like 30 years, and so why aren't you having maybe a 50-something or something-year-old guy who's a computer whiz? He's the guy that taught the young kids what to do, and so that's another thing. And I know you've talked about how the process has changed, because I think it used to be everybody. I even read a thing, I saw it recently with Pat Moran. Said, well, when she started, the big thing was the headshot. And for her, though, she said, now it's a selfie.
Yeah, and I still love headshots, but because people do want to know what you look like today, right now, this very moment, that they will often ask, what I want to see you look like today. So when you're not all fixed up from the makeup artist at the headshot photographer. But
a lot of it's videos too, don't they send video auditions now a lot?
But there's nothing like a live audition. I mean, to be in the room with somebody and be able to give direction and interface with them, I think it goes back to your question about, how do you select someone? Well, I've had an opportunity to work with them. I really feel I could be better suggesting them, because I've given direction and I see they can take direction, and have asked that personal question about what do you do when you're not here. And if somebody says, well, I'm a school teacher when I'm not here, and it is that film that there is going to be kids, that already is going to make the director's job easier, because now they have a collaborator and a partner in dealing with the kids.
So I mean, a lot of times you're there on the auditions, obviously, because you're going to say your decision and the director's going to accept that, as opposed to I've seen things like on TV or in the movies where the director is sitting there and the director with a couple of other people decides who's cast for what.
In the old days, when I first started casting, often the directors would be there for callbacks, but even that, just with new technology and time, that, they're happy to just sit and watch the video. So they're really trusting that we've made good decisions up to that point, though. So again, having the audition in the room leaves me much more comfortable in the people I'm putting forward.
It puts a lot of responsibility on you, doesn't it?
It does. And again, more so than it did before, because they were in the room making that final decision with you, as opposed to, who you're putting forward just on, that.
Because everybody who knows films will say, because they're on budget and they have so many shooting days, if you
they want the one-take wonders.
Yeah, but they gave you as you gave the director an actor that he or she didn't like, then you said, well, you're going to put me behind because now we have to cast this role again.
Right.
So I don't know if it's like sports.
Thank heavens that hasn't happened to me yet.
Yeah, good, because I was going to say it could be like sports teams where you have somebody, but then you have like the stand-in or the person on the bench who could fill in.
Yeah, they usually don't have.
If the director...
In film and TV, there's no understudy like in theater.
Yeah.
So that if we don't like choice A, we can move on to choice B.
Okay, and I was going to ask too, as far as getting actors, do you work with agents? Do agents suggest people to you, or are there casting agencies that you deal with?
This is a great question, too, because of the DMV, as they call it, market. In Los Angeles and New York, you were traditionally, in Chicago and Boston, a couple of other big markets, and now even Atlanta, you really are working with and collaborating with the agents and managers. But in the DMV area, there really has not been that many, and for sure, when I started 28 years ago, there was not that set up in the market. They just didn't have it set up like that. So you really had to know everyone yourself. So I still do work with agents and managers, and we'll have them submit things because I need to always be increasing my creative pool. And a lot of times it still comes down to, in the end, I must say on House of Cards, those numbers of seasons, that in the end, the majority of people I was casting really did not have agents and managers. It was people I knew, people I had seen at a show, or a friend of a friend had said, oh, I was in this show and I met this person, you should call them in. But I like that side of it. That's the real detective, creative side of it, that you just don't rest on the laurels of the same people that you cast in the last 5 shows. It's my responsibility to also go find new people as well.
I was going to say that next, to say, because you've worked long enough, there are certain actors you like, certain actors you've worked with before. It's almost like when some of these directors have their little stock company of actors. To say, is there a Kimberly Skyrme stock company? They say, well, this one or that one would be perfect for that role,
There probably is a few that you could say that, but I must say that I also really force myself to also audition new people as well, because you don't know everyone. And somebody you met 10 years ago, if they have been studying, they've really enhanced their skills. And that is one of my favorite things, I must say, that over the years, to keep calling in people to see their journey as they've grown as actors. So then you can kind of add them in too. So I like doing that, which is why I love, with any projects I'm working on, to do table reads and give actors the opportunity to come in and maybe read a role that we would like to cast them for and see how they do in the table read. And I have had that change directors' minds as well, that we had an actress out of town who was potentially slated for something, but I thought somebody was a little more interesting as a choice. And so I had her at the table read, and I made sure she sat next to the director. And again, he fell in love with her for the role. So we did change things up a bit by doing that. So.
And what about new actors as opposed to experienced actors? I mean, in a sense of saying, do you get like resumes or whatever, people's, and say, oh, well, this person's done so much that, they'll have more weight as far as getting the part, as opposed to somebody may only done one or two parts, or just got their SAG card.
Oh, you're asking all the fun questions, because I always have interesting alternative answers to these. Because unlike most casting directors, I mean, unless I'm really restricted on time and I only have 5 slots to see somebody for a day, then I really do have to call in 5 qualified people. But if I have the leeway, I typically look at people's resumes after they have auditioned. So I like to see them actually doing what it is that they do, which is being the character. So then I'll turn over the resume and see, what have they done? Because I think you find some people, it's a craft like any craft, that there's people who are intuitively just skilled at being actors. And it shouldn't really be based on how much work they've done, but how believable are they? Because really the viewer isn't looking at their resume, they're watching their performance. So if they're telling the story, I think that becomes more important than how many things they did on their resume.
So you kind of go into it blind, that sense of not knowing their history, unless it's somebody so famous. As a character actor, like I'll be interviewing in December George Stover. Everybody knows who he is, for example. But he's played a lot of different kinds of roles too. So I'm just saying, you're not going to blow that away. Oh, this man's worked for 40 years and 300 movies and that kind of thing. As
But so when I go to these auditions, you're often, again, given the headshots and resumes, and I just choose to look at them afterwards. Because then I'll be curious, well, what have they done, and where did they study, and where have they picked up all these skills? But I think it's a level playing ground if I just watch performance and then see later.
When they come in, though, for the interview, or actually the read for you, do you give them anything like here's the lines or the sides or whatever, But do you say, that's what they call them, the sides, and do you say, well, this is what the character is like? Do you give them a little background of how to play it? Do you give them any clues?
I personally, having studied theater in college myself, am a big proponent of the more information given to the actor beforehand means that they can come prepared. And it gives you then, as a casting director, or even the director, an opportunity to really, play, as they say, because they've been given information on the character, they've been given this actual script, and as well as the sides. So you can get an overview of the entire film and what story we're trying to tell and then really focus on the side. So I do work hard. Even back in the day when I had to say, could you please fax over the sides in advance so that actors could come and pick them up, or if they were lucky enough at the time to have a fax machine, that we could fax them over to them. So yeah, so certainly in my early days when even actors had fax machines too, I would have to hire somebody just for the day to come over and just fax. So their whole job was, after somebody else was busy calling, because we had to call everybody, them and set them up for their auditions, and we would fax them the side so that they can have them. So I feel that the more information I can get out to actors in advance, the better. And yes, in some occasions you do have a cold read because you may come to the audition, and then after the director and I have seen you, we think, oh, well, there is that other role, so you may be given some sides that you would have to just look at for the first time today. But I'm all about the more information, the better.
Well, that's good. Is that typical or atypical? Because I think a lot of times people say, boom, you're coming in, here's, as you're coming, they're all coming in, here are the lines you're going to be reading today, and it's like the person knows nothing but what's on the page.
It's probably atypical, I have
What
heard.
you do.
Yes, yeah, it's not the norm. Because it does take more time, and it takes, extra people, and that's extra manpower, and I just feel like it's my duty as an artist and a storyteller to make sure that everybody gets as much information as I would want to have if I was an actor.
Now, one of the things I was going to bring up is interesting is because of the job that you do, do you have either of these problems? One where people say to you, hey, I know somebody would be perfect for that part. Or they say, hey, how about me? Or do you ever accost somebody and say, you have an interesting look. I think you should read for this part.
Actually, all of the above.
You do all of those? You've had all those experiences?
All of those things have happened.
Do you have any stories to share?
Well, actually, it was very funny. On House of Cards, yes, there was just a gentleman who lived in the building where we had the casting office, and he was an attorney, and we needed a hot dog vendor, and he just totally looked like a hot dog vendor. He'd always come by and look and see what we were doing, and so he was curious enough for me to then say, well, you just want to audition. And in the end, I must say that he had so much fun doing it. He auditioned for something in every episode, and has since got a manager in New York and started acting. But he was, many successful years as an attorney, and so he was just really entering the acting arena from a very comfortable place, and was just having fun with it. But he was a very specific type, so it worked. And he's not going to be Meryl Streep tomorrow, with his kind of breadth of his skill, but had fun doing it. And of course,
so what we want to do now is ask you to give the people out there your contact information.
Sure. The best contact information at this point is KimberlySkyrmeCreative.com. There's an information site there, and you can have that as your contact portal for me.
There we go. That's simple and elegant. Just one place. One-stop shop for Kimberly, folks. And I want to thank you for being here. It was a pleasure. I was looking forward to this interview.
Excellent.
And like every interview, I always sweat the interview before I have it because I want it to be just right. And so you made it so easy. So.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. I loved it.
Thank you for being here.
I look forward to being back.
Well, we'd love to have you back, and when we maybe hopefully film that table read on December 15th.
Coming back, I should say.
Yeah. Well, you can come on back here too, and we'll talk about projects as they're being developed. And things.
Wonderful.
And maybe we can get a remote interview with Peter Bogdanovich. That would be great.
Yes, I will keep you posted on that. I'm sure he would love it. He loves that kind of thing.
You think he would?
Absolutely.
This fledgling industry that we're starting here?
No, he would love it. He's really a very intriguing man.
Well, terrific. Well, folks, that's the end of another fascinating show here. And see us the next time, whoever I might be interviewing from anywhere in the world of entertainment, books, or politics. So good night.
You're watching The Paul Stefan Show on TV Free Baltimore.
The Despothier is on my shore, Maryland, my Maryland. His torch is at thy temple door, Maryland, my Maryland. Avenge the patriotic roar that fleck the streets of Baltimore, and be the battle queen of yore, Maryland, my Maryland.
This concludes another day of live stream broadcasting from TV Free Baltimore.